So you picked up an Atari ST, like this one here. You got it booted and running, just like this one here. And maybe you have a few working floppy disks, or maybe you have a Gotek, or maybe you don't have any software run on it at all. Well, in today's world, we're used to having hard drives on our modern computers, full of software that you can run in a click. And with the price of things like SD cards and micro SD cards going down and down and down, for less than $10, you can have a massive amount of storage here that hopefully you can have a hard drive solution for your Atari ST. Well, in today's Atari 101 video, I'm going to go over hard drives in the Atari ST. Let's go. Well, at VCF Midwest this year, 2025, I had more than a few folks come up to me and say, hey, can you do some videos on just getting started with the Atari ST? And, you know, I thought that's actually a really good idea. Keep it kind of simple, keep it focused on specific topics. Well, thus the Atari ST 101 series of videos is born. This is the second video of that series and is focused on getting started with hard drives in an Atari ST. Now, during my time growing up with an Atari 520 ST and an external floppy drive, the only way I could actually get software to run on my Atari ST was with that floppy drive and the floppy disks. In my mind, I knew about hard drives, right? And my dad's computer had a hard drive in it. But in my mind, a hard drive was only something you found in IBM compatible computers, various different PCs and such. Whereas I never even knew that hard drives could be connected to an Atari ST, or it was way out of my realm of thinking about that. All Atari STs, except for the Falcon, had an ACSI or Atari Computer Systems interface port. This port could be connected to various peripherals, but most frequently to hard drives. This ACSI interface was actually similar to the emerging industry standard SCSI, or Small Computer System Interface. Now, even though SCSI and SCSI-like interfaces had been developed and used by multiple systems over the years, the interface was only officially standardized and renamed to SCSI in 1986. In many ways, ACSI and SCSI are actually very similar, but there are a couple high-level differences between the two. First off, the physical connector of the ACSI uses a 19-bin connector, while SCSI uses these different options. Call it a standard. I know, it's not necessarily a standard for connection, it's a standard for how it works. Now, number two, the ACSI bus requires that the computer initiates control over the bus, while SCSI allows for either the computer or the peripheral to initiate control. Additionally, and lastly, this is the last one I'm going to give. There's probably dozens of other differences that are very nuanced, but ACSI has a maximum cable length of 2 feet between devices, while SCSI can work it up to, in this case, I think this is 6 feet, 18 to 20 feet long cables. So that's a distinct difference in the capabilities between the devices and how they function. Now, most of the Atari ST drives, hard drives that existed back in the day, back in the 80s and 90s, were simply SCSI drives that were hooked up to converters of various nature to translate the ACSI to the SCSI in order to connect them. This drive right here, this SH204, has this drive in here. It's either an RLL or MFM drive. I'm not sure, I would call it an MFM. It's MFM look-alike, if nothing else. But what you see here on this board, this powered board here, is the SCSI to MFM converter, translator, whatever you want to call it, right? And inside of this drive here is an ACSI to SCSI converter. So you're going from ACSI to SCSI to MFM or RLL, one of those two, right? Right now I've got actually a SCSI to ST hooked up in this guy, right? So there's a lot of commonality between the two at that point in time. Now, speaking of a SCSI to ST in here, a modern replacement, that brings us to what can we use today? Getting to modern drive options, right? Like I mentioned in here, if there's an existing drive housing that you have that has a ACSI to SCSI converter, well, you can just connect a SCSI to SD or say a Blue SCSI or Zulu SCSI to it and generally use that as it is. But you have to have those translators already in place. There are much better options, Atari specific options that plug in directly to the ACSI port, or maybe not at all. All right. And I'm going to walk through 3 actively developed options today that you can find commercially. All right. Which makes it important. There have been many different solutions that have been in the past, that have been put together and developed in the past, but they tend to come, they tend to go. There's some that have lasted a lot longer than others. And then there's some that are newly coming up. So please don't take this as a gospel. This specific adapter is what I should use today. This is more of classifications. But since this is an Atari 101 video, I want to preface this is not meant to be a comprehensive listing of all hard drive options that have existed, ever exist, or will exist in the future. And I won't be doing a speed comparison or diving into the nuts and bolts on exactly how each of these options are working. But we're going to talk about getting them set up and working. And those things will probably continue onward as you go forward. Now, the first one, and I look at this as the gold standard. This is the Ultrasatan, and there's a couple different flavors of this. This is the external cased version. There is a mini version. There's one that you can actually put internally to a Mega ST and connect up to the headers that a Mega ST has inside of it for ACSI, its ACSI port. And those are all fantastic. I think, like I said, they're the gold standard. This is developed by, I know his handle is Juki. And when you boot up any Ultrasatan, you'll actually see the name Juki. This allows for use of a micro or standard SD card or media to be used as hard disk storage by connecting to the ACSI port. This has been my primary hard drive solution for nearly 10 years with very minimal headaches. It does require specialized driver software for partitioning and initializing the SD cards, as well as to install the driver onto the SD cards themselves. And I'll discuss that later when I talk about drivers. Another fantastic option using the STM32 microcontroller is the ACSI2STM. It's a wonderful option, and I've actually done a video on it, just on that specific option, I don't know, maybe about a year ago, thereabouts. And it's really, really good for those folks that are just starting out with Atari STs and want a hard drive solution, and they want to make it easy in order to translate files back and forth. They don't want to have to dilly-dally with drivers or whatnot, or any of those other things, but have the option to actually do it in the future. So it operates in 2 different modes. You have a gem drive mode, and then you have an ACSI compatibility mode. And let's just talk about the gem drive mode. Gem drive mode is a driverless mode that can access SD cards formatted in FAT32, FAT16, or even exFAT, right? Massive sizes. And I'll talk about more about drivers later on and partitioning later on, but you don't need partitioning for gem drive, which is actually one of the fantastic things associated with it. This option eliminates the need for any extra steps and provides super ease of transferring files from your PC directly to that SD card. Boom, just copy over and you're good to go. This makes transferring files from your Atari ST a breeze. Now, there's a couple downsides to this, however. The gem drive introduces some compatibility issues, especially when running specialized or what might be considered more advanced ST software. There's actually a great compatibility section of its GitHub, and who knows, maybe at some point in the future they'll actually work around and actually figure a way to work past those kinds of those issues on the ACSI to STM. You can see a link to the GitHub down below. Now, one thing about this option is that you have the ACSI mode, so you can get that compatibility back. Now, this requires some extra steps, such as having a driver in the partitioning setup of that SD card. And I'll discuss that again later on. I've said that multiple times. I'm going to discuss it later on. We'll do that later. But I do want to emphasize that the gem drive mode is most folks who want a hard drive solution for their Atari ST will ever need. I repeat, gem drive is awesome and works for most stuff. Now, the last of the 3 that I'm going to talk about right now is actually a fairly recent development, and it's in constant development. The developers actually work on this like crazy. And I've talked about this before in the past. I've not used it until recently as a hard drive solution, but this is the Sidecartridge. And it does all sorts of stuff, tons of stuff. There are plenty of videos on it. I've done a video on it before in the past where I didn't focus on the hard drive portion of it, but that was in development at the time. The developer is extremely active. And the solution is actually a gem drive solution, similar to the ACSI to STM, except for it plugs in the third cartridge port rather than the ACSI port. You have that same compatibility issue or opportunity with where you can just copy files into an HD folder on the flash drive, or that flash drive, the SD card that you've got connected in your side cartridge. In the case of the hard drive, like I said, it acts as a gem drive, very simple to copy. You know, there is no ACSI mode for this. I don't know. I wouldn't put it past the developer, as given how kind of rapidly he's always working on stuff. Maybe it will never happen, but maybe it will. You have tons of functionality, but you're not going to get that in that advanced capabilities that I mentioned with the ACSI mode. Again, what is it you always, generally most people need? Really, gem drive is pretty much most things anyone will ever need. Prior to the gem drives, all hard drives needed to be specially formatted, partitioned with driver software in order to be used and recognized. Now, this applies to anything from original old school spinning Rust hard drives to things like SD cards and the like. There are some versions of TOS or emutos that actually has driver software, hard disk driver software baked into it. So you don't necessarily need to have those partitioned with the external software. The emutos will take care of that for you. For most systems, you need to specially format and partition the hard drive or SD card and then install the driver and to tell Atari how to use the hard drive. Each of these drivers have partitioning and setup software that will need to be loaded from a floppy disk or Gotek image up front. You will then use this software to first set up partitions on the SD card, format and set up partitions. For TOS 1.04, Rainbow TOS, and newer, these partitions must be 500 megabytes or smaller in size. There are ways around this, but I'm going to keep this simple. This is Atari 101 for that matter. For TOS versions earlier, like TOS 1.02 and 1.0, partitions must be 250 megabytes or smaller in size. Now, one thing I've noticed myself in my own experience is TOS 1.0, even with those smaller partition sizes, it starts running into stability issues. And so I'd recommend at least TOS 1.2, if not TOS 1.4. 1.04, 1.02, or newer at least. Once the partitioning is complete, the driver must be installed on the hard drive, which will always be the first thing to auto boot when the hard drive is active. Another thing to consider is that this driver does occupy RAM, and it reduces RAM available for running software. The amount really depends upon the driver. Some use more, some use less, but it ranges up to 32 kilobytes, 40 kilobytes, thereabouts, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. And it seems like a relatively minimal amount. However, for a 520 ST or an ST with 512 kilobytes of RAM, take away 40 kilobytes of RAM from it. Software is designed for the Atari ST was designed to run on the minimum software most of the time, the minimum RAM requirements of 512K. If you take away 40 kilobytes from it, you have less. And that can inhibit your ability to run software from that hard drive because you don't have enough RAM with the driver software being loaded into RAM. The same thing can go for a 1 megabyte ST, running 1 megabyte requirement, 1 megabyte of RAM requiring software. If you're just below it, you're not above it, and you can run into issues in that case. Now, ideally, something a bit more than 1 megabyte would be fine. 1.5, 2.0, 2.5 megabytes of RAM would be just fine. But given that most Atari STs, that all Atari STs can actually support 4 megabytes, and nowadays the price of RAM, the difference is relatively low, especially for those RAM, that level of RAM. 2.5 megabytes versus 4 megabytes versus 2 megabytes is basically the same thing, right? So go for the 4 megabytes just to be safe. Now, there are a few different drivers that you can use in order to set up your hard drives. But there's 3 main ones that I would suggest that you take a look at. And these are the 3 that I've worked with in the past. I've actually worked with a couple other ones as well, just to kind of play around with them. But let's start with ICD Pro. ICD Pro is a freely available hard disk driver that is fully featured. The one thing it doesn't do is it doesn't allow for easy transmission of data from your PC to your Atari, right? So when you format and partition these SD cards, it will be in a way that your PC can't read it and will look at it as it's a corrupted drive, right? So you'll need to find some other way for transferring files, like using a floppy disk or over the network or some other method, right? It's not actively maintained, but it is a no-cost way to try this out. Try the ACSI kind of hard drive modes out. You can find it. I'll give a link in the description below of where you can find this. The second one, and this is actually the first driver that I purchased myself, is PPera's driver, hard disk driver. I don't know if there's a name for it, but PPera is the person who works on it, and it's actively maintained, and it's a commercial driver, meaning you have to pay for it. It's a fully featured driver, and it allows for co-compatible format, a co-compatible Atari PC format that allows for relatively easy transfer of files between a PC and your Atari ST. This gives you that compatibility of the ACSI mode and some of the flexibility of the gem drive mode, some of the flexibility of the gem drive mode I mentioned earlier. All right, the third driver, last driver I'm going to talk about today, is HDDriver. HDDriver is also another actively maintained commercial driver package. It's fantastic. It's updated on a pretty regular basis. There is a cost associated with it, though. In my experience, the software here is the most flexible of the three. The PPera's driver, ICD Pro, they work fantastic with things like Ultrasatans, the ACSI to STMs, just fine, right? And even some of the older hardware as well. HDDriver goes beyond that. And it works in everything ranging from original Atari hardware to the ACSI to STM, to external SCSI zip drives, to internal IDE drives connected to accelerators. So if you're wanting to tinker with your Atari and push it to its limits, this is probably the best choice. And this is what I use the most at the moment. I've used all three of these. They're all fantastic. They're all great. But what I use primarily now at this point in time is the HDDriver. With the HDDriver, you need to set up Atari bootable partitions in the Atari only readable options. Let's just say you have to have the bootable partition only readable by the Atari system, by TOS. But you can also create partitions that are TOS and PC readable. And what you can do there is that allows you to, you have some partitions that are readable only by TOS by your Atari ST, and then other partitions that are readable by both systems. In this case, what I have with my Ultrasatan is I have this one here, this SD card on the left-hand side is Atari ST or TOS readable only. This one on this side is readable by both PC and TOS. So I use this one to transfer files from my PC over. Is it as easy and flexible as the PPera or a gem drive? No, but it's pretty darn flexible nonetheless. It gives you that opportunity, some of that flexibility that you'd like to have, or that I like to have. There are other HDI drivers. These are the Atari drives, Atari hard disk driver interface, whatever you want to call it, from Atari as well. And they'll likely work with the original Atari hardware. I haven't tried them with something like an Ultrasatan or anything else, but I wouldn't recommend necessarily wasting your time that path. Lastly, on this note, remember that running a gem drive compatible option like the ACSI to STM or Sidecartridge, you will not need any driver software. I repeat, no driver software, which is why, again, I like to say that's probably the best solution for most people. Okay, regardless of the hard drive option you selected, you should now have a hard drive setup and working, like this Ultrasatan here, and you have some way to get files from your PC to your Atari. The Atari ST was launched when the vast majority of software was run directly from floppy drive, here on the side here. Much of this software expects to access a floppy drive. So let's just say I copied a lovely game to, let's see here, yes, test. So I copied this software. This is from a game that I love dearly, and it is Ultima 4. So I copied directly from the floppy disk files. And let's just see if I can execute it. In most instances, I don't know if you can hear this, but it's trying to access the floppy drive, right? Simply copying the executables and data from your floppy disk to your hard drive will generally result in disappointment. In some instances, it may work. And in those instances, that's usually productivity software and not games. A lot of games have also been adapted to run from a hard drive by different members of the community. But especially the author of that hard disk driver, PPera, he actually has done a fantastic job converting a lot of floppy disk games to run from a hard drive. That's what I have here stored in these different areas. These are loads of games that have been adapted to run on the hard drive. And let's just pick one here. Oh, I just happened to find Ultima 5 here. Now on his website, he actually describes what he needs to do, some of the various different tasks he needs to do in order to adapt floppy disk games in order to run from a hard drive. In addition to the convenience of having a large chunk of the Atari ST software library at your fingertips with a hard drive solution, loading programs from a hard drive solution is vastly faster than booting from a floppy disk, or even booting a floppy image through a Gotek. When running software from a floppy or Gotek, the speed of data transfer, not the Atari ST, is the limiting factor in loading. Here's comparing booting the game Ultima 4 from a floppy drive and from a hard disk drive. Okay, using the Sidecartridge as a hard drive solution is a little bit different than the others. Number one, first and foremost, is that you're using the cartridge port. There we go. What we're going to do now is we're going to just hold down the button on the side and get this to reset. And then we can do this. Now we have to select option number 4, emulate hard drive. Right there, boom. And I'm just going to hit S to start emulation. And then it restarts the computer. And what it does is it takes the files that are in the HD directory on the SD card, micro SD card. And that's what you can transfer over from your PC over to here. So I have some Office software here, sysinfo, etc., games, a whole slew of stuff. We're going to go down near the bottom. And show you how simply it boots. There we go. Works wonderfully. It's a great solution. Well, I hope this video is helpful and helps you to get started in using a hard disk solution for your Atari ST. Please do the YouTube stuff, like, subscribe, comment. Comment below, share your Atari ST hard drive experiences with everyone here. And if you have your favorite hard disk drive type of emulator that's out there that I didn't mention, please put it in the comments below as well. All right, thanks for watching and have a fantastic day. Bye.